Hello again, friends. It is Friday, and that can mean only one thing. It's time for Jesuit Lunch Hour, as always, powered by beajesuit.org. I'm Father Michael Rossman, and I'm joined by another great Jesuit this week, Mr. Justin Prom. Justin, welcome to Jesuit Lunch Hour.
Hi, thanks, Father Michael. Appreciate it.
Justin, I always ask at the beginning, guys, to share a bit about their story. So could you give us a bit about your background?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm from Cedarburg, Wisconsin. I went to Marquette High School and then Marquette University. So both Jesuit schools. Got to know them pretty early. And I actually also attended St. Francis Borgia School, who I found out not until I was in college. St. Francis Borgia was also a Jesuit. It wasn't a Jesuit school, but I've kind of been being followed around, and I've been following around the Jesuits basically my whole life. So after Marquette University, I studied biomedical engineering there. I did a co-op program, so I was there for 5 years, working 1 year full time in that time, and then entered the Jesuits right after that. So that was now.
And that was just a couple years ago, right?
Exactly.
So for those who may be less familiar, the Jesuits have a 2-year novitiate, which is kind of the initial stage of our formation or training. I oftentimes describe the novitiate as a school of the heart or a school of prayer. You completed that stage of training when you did not have a cell phone of your own, but clearly you have finished that stage of your training.
Working out the kinks. Yeah.
and you took vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience as a Jesuit just in August, right?
Yeah.
Excellent. And could you tell us a little bit about kind of what is involved in the novitiate, that initial stage of training, and what was your experience of that?
Yeah, that's cool that you call it the school of the heart, because people hear often that the Jesuit formation is so long, and it is. We're in formation really effectively for about 11 years until ordination for those of us who are studying to be priests. But it's not school the whole time. It's not just the books the whole time. So the novitiate especially was a time of really getting to know God in a more personal way, Jesus in a more personal way, and kind of living into Jesuit life. And like, what does Jesuit life look like for me? What can it look like for me? And so there are lots of different kind of core Jesuit experiences that we go through in that time. One, just learning to live with our brothers in community. Like that is a big deal to be able to do well and to thrive in this life, to be able to live in community. And then other spiritual things like learning about the spiritual exercises, and then taking the spiritual exercises, this month-long silent retreat where we're really spending a lot of personal time with the Lord. And then some other experiences that are just kind of meant to push us out of our comfort zone a bit, working in a healthcare environment, a hospital environment for a few months, a pilgrimage experiment, which is where we're kind of kicked out the door with about $35, and we have 30 days to really rely on God to take care of us and the generosity of other people. And really that whole time just learning. For me, it was a time of learning how close God is in any given moment, and how to let that inform my life.
Yeah, I mean, perhaps we could talk about that more. You mentioned the spiritual exercises. With novices, it's done in the context of a 30-day silent retreat, as you said. Can you share a little bit about your experience of the exercises and how God was particularly close to you during that month?
Sure. Yeah, a big draw for me to the Jesuits in general was our spirituality, Ignatian spirituality, and the real kind of versatility of it. Ignatius was pretty big on emphasizing that God can be found and served in everything. And so when we do the spiritual exercises, kind of the first section of that is looking back on how God was present in our lives and the ways that we cooperated with that or didn't cooperate with that. And then kind of he has basic rules and guides for discernment that kind of basically it's kind of like a manual for what does the voice of God sound like. How do I know that I'm hearing the Holy Spirit, that I'm hearing God at work in my life, or is that just something that I'm making up, or is that actually maybe I'm kind of tricking myself? And it's this really helpful sort of manual that as I was reading these sort of rules for discernment that he has, just seeing, wow, these are all true to my experience. Like I've felt this way before, and to know that this is something that Ignatius developed almost 500 years ago, and that it still rings true to my spiritual experience, a 25-year-old in the year 2020, is pretty amazing. And I think it to me it's really consoling that is a core part of our spirituality and who we are as Jesuits.
Yeah, absolutely. I often give talks or retreats about Ignatian discernment around the Midwest, and it is stunning just how relevant Ignatius's rules for discernment are for people today. Were there any surprises that took place during that month of the long retreat?
Yeah, on the long retreat for me, I would say even more than on that month itself. It's one thing to I think go through that month, but then I think all of the time since then is me still learning to live into this like month-long experience that I had, where I felt like I was just me and God for a whole month, and now I'm like back in the world again. Okay, but how do I live this, and how do I kind of use what graces I feel like I've gained to share that with other people? And one of the kind of an amazing sort of surprise experience that I had was in my ministry for my second year. I was working as a chaplain at the Ramsey County Jail, and basically all that meant was showing up at the jail and meeting with men individually who requested to see a chaplain, and it was kind of, I mean, nerve-wracking because it was a new experience for me, and I didn't really know what to expect, and but it was kind of it's very amazing the way that when you would just get in there and one-on-one with this man who on the surface it felt like when I was going in we wouldn't have much in common, but then one experience in particular was talking with this guy who was explaining a decision that he was trying to make in his life. He was telling about how he wanted to stop using drugs. And he said he wanted to get to a point where maybe he could only use for like once every month or so. And I was like, okay. And we kind of kept talking. And then he started talking about how he wanted to get involved in the choir at his church. And we're like, okay, tell me more about that. And then shortly after that, this is kind of where it gets back into this discernment of spirits and Ignatius's rules. I just kind of asked him like how he was feeling about things, and he says, well, actually, as I was talking about how I just wanted to, use drugs sometimes, I felt this really dark and heavy kind of weight on me, and I felt this just pulling me down. But when I was talking about going to church and singing in the choir, there was just this light and this energy and peace, and it stayed with me. And I kind of just like almost fell out of my chair. I was like it's like he was reading out of the text from Ignatius's discernment experience. Like I was like, that's God. That's God talking to you. And in that moment, I was just kind of floored and seeing how God speaks to him and to all of us in these very kind of characteristic ways of this sort of lightness and consolation and affirmation that lead us toward this sense of faith and hope and love. That's a surefire way to say, yeah, that's God talking, and to hear that in his experience and to know how much it lined up with mine was pretty beautiful.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, those experiences that he was describing sound a lot like desolation and then consolation.
Exactly.
Can you talk about, God speaks to us through consolation. What does that look like in your own life, or what was an experience of consolation that was significant either in your discernment process before you joined the Jesuits, or perhaps during your experience as a Jesuit novice?
Yeah, great question. So for me, maybe a good moment for that was to talk about was just leading up to my vows, before vows, and before I had kind of formally declared that I was asking for vows. I was kind of doing the last ditch discernment, like, okay, am I doing this or not? Am I going to jump in or not? And kind of got myself into a little bit of a panic. Like I was trying to reason through all of the ways that you're just trying to make absolutely sure that I knew I was doing the right thing. And I started to really focus on my own happiness. I was thinking, okay, what's going to make me the most happy? Is it going to be this? Is it going to be married life? Is it going to be working as an engineer? And I was focusing very inward. And while I was focusing on that, it was pretty constant sort of doubting and frustration and confusion. And those are pretty key telltale signs, Ignatius would say, of the work of the evil spirit or of desolation. And, you know, even after my 2 years of talking about these things and thinking about these things, they still were hard for me to recognize when I was in the moment. But then when I kind of shifted in my discernment a little bit, and getting to talk to a spiritual director, a trusted companion about these things was very helpful. Reframing the question to what are the ways that I feel like I'm called to serve, and remembering the experiences that I had of walking with people in whether it was in the jail or in some of my other ministries, and the movements there of service. And it's just like those they just filled my heart with this sense of love and energy and kind of even a real passion. Like I want to, as I was thinking about some of the specific people that I got to work with at the hospital, and how much I really had grown to care for them, that feeling, that burning in my heart of like, I want to do this more and I want to pour myself out for them. That for me was a very real experience of consolation. And when I was in that space, all of the doubt and the confusion kind of melted away. And it wasn't even that I had proven to myself that I knew that the right decision, but it was just learning to trust that feeling of consolation, that feeling of peace and motivation for me.
That's great. Someone far wiser than I said, happiness is not something to pursue. Rather, happiness is something that ensues, you know, that comes after giving ourselves to something, to service. And I think what you're describing is right on. Additionally, desolation, you know, at least for me, one of the telltale signs is when I just do the navel gazing thing and I just get stuck in my own stuff. Yeah. And of course, we need to pay attention to what is stirring within, but with that outward gaze as well, and that stance of giving ourselves to others. And then, as you so beautifully described, you know, paying attention to what is the sense of meaning. Are those signs of consolation present when we give ourselves in different ways?
Sure.
Great. And what has your experience been like, you know, in these last couple months since taking vows? What have you been up to since then?
Yeah, so we took vows in August. My classmates and I, 7 of us total, was a really beautiful ceremony, kind of very surreal. And of course, because of the pandemic, we weren't able to have all of the guests there that we would love to have had. Just a very minimal number. And then, unfortunately, even the day before, I found out a member of my family tested positive for COVID, and so they weren't able to be there. And so it was difficult, but at the same time, it was. And I've talked to them about this since. For both of us, it was very much kind of an experience of letting go and learning to trust Jesus, that I'm giving my life over for his sake. And so the vows were very much an experience of that. And I've been having to keep leaning on that because basically, what was it, 2 days after we took vows, we packed up all our things in the car, and our class split up in 2 to go to our first studies location, our next stage of formation. So I moved to Chicago 2 days from St. Paul, 2 days after vows, and have been starting my philosophy and theology formal study in this past 2 months here. So I'm living on campus, and I haven't really been able to go into the buildings. So it's an interesting experience being on campus and being a student here, but it's been a really cool opportunity to really invest in our community as well, because we have to take care of each other. We have to make sure everyone's doing okay and in a challenging time like this. So yeah, it's been a great transition with some bumps along the way for sure.
Yeah, yeah. And even though we are in the same city, we're both in Chicago. I haven't seen you guys up at Loyola University in recent months. So hopefully someday in the not so distant future, we'll be able to gather in person. But, this is a pretty good opportunity in the meantime to discuss here on Jesuit Lunch Hour. At the end of our conversations, I tend to ask guys, what piece of advice or what nugget of wisdom might you offer to a person in discernment, whether someone is discerning priestly or religious life or discerning something else in their respective lives?
Sure. Yeah, two things come to mind right off the bat. The first being very simple. Spend any amount of time every day just praying a little bit. I think that's the biggest thing that I have to be reminded over and over again. Even if it's 5-10 minutes, even if it's 15 minutes of silence or something during the day, just setting it aside once every day. That has been really important for me. And really the next thing, and for me, which needs constant reminding, but is also really freeing, is just I've been told multiple times in my life, and it will need to be told again, not to take myself too seriously, not to take my discernment too seriously. I have this tendency to just like really try to get it all figured out and to do it right, and I want to please God, and it's like, okay, well, just tell me your will and I'll do it. But yeah, the advice when I'm reminded to just live, and you're gonna mess up, but God is there and He's there to pick you back up. You go back to Him when you need to, but trust that just in living that I will be able to move forward, and that God's gonna make the best of what I give. So that has been really freeing advice for me.
Amen. I was actually just looking at the readings for Mass today because I'll celebrate Mass later. And our first reading is from Paul's letter to the Philippians. And he has that classic line that you hear at an ordination about, may God who has begun a good work in you bring it to completion. That we have a role to play, for sure. We cooperate with God's grace, but we do not do this alone. And I think all of us could have that reminder that, it's not about figuring it out totally ourselves. Of course, we have a role to play, but we need to pay attention to how, God is moving in our lives. And I think having that daily rhythm of prayer, as you also talk about, is just so essential. Justin Prom, thank you so much for joining us here at Jesuit Lunch Hour, powered by beajesuit.org. Again, I look forward to talking in person, but I'm so glad we could talk online and have others get to know you as well. Thanks, Justin.
Michael, thank you.
All right. Take care, everyone. Have a good week.
See ya.